Hello Runeterrans, and hopefully welcome back. Today Riot gave us a bunch of reveals, but no champions yet again. Now I think I know why they are doing this. As you look at today's package, it's going to become very apparent that it's supposed to be some sort of Fizz support package. We already had a Teemo support package as well, and we know that some of the existing champions in the game, like Fizz, like Teemo, Lulu, Heimerdinger, etc., those yorldes are kind of moving over to Bandle City. They're still going to be a part of their original region, but they're getting that dual region treatment. And so I suspect that we're not going to get as many champions in the set for Bandle City because they're already going to have some. And as a result of that, instead of getting full reveal packages per champion like we're used to, what we are instead getting is support packages within Bandle City for existing champions. And so today's appears to be Fizz, but don't let that fool you. Just because there's no champion doesn't mean that today's reveals are not spicy, and I believe that they are. And we're going to dive right into what I think is potentially the big one, which is Prank. This is a one-cost focus spell from Bandle City, and it is a token spell. You notice that right away because there is no rarity gem in the bottom middle of the card. That means it will only be made by other cards. It is a created card, but don't let that fool you either, because this is something else, gang. You pick one of two non-champion cards in the enemy's hand or deck and prank it. Now, the official Twitter account for Legends of Runeterra only mentioned hand. The card itself mentions hand or deck. I suspect this is always meant to pull from hand unless your opponent does not have enough cards in their hand, in which case it will then apply the effects to cards in the enemy's deck. I do not have that as a confirmation. As of filming this right now, I do not know if that is 100% the case, but that would be my suspicion just on the way they have rolled this out. Now, obviously, with the card prank, you need to know what prank it means. If it says, hey, pick a card and prank it, what does that even do? Well, the official Legends of Runeterra Twitter account released an image with an explanation, and I kind of alluded to that earlier. And the explanation came with this image, and it said that random negative effects would be assigned to two revealed cards. Again, the Twitter account said only from hand, so I assume it pulls from the hand first. And then you pick one and apply that negative effect. So here we can see River Shaper could be granted -2 power, and Caretaker could be granted -1 power and can't block. Now, you did not get to choose the negative effects here. These were assigned at random. We also do not know what the full suite of potential negative effects are. We do know that Prank can hit both followers and spells, so it's entirely possible that stuff for spells might just be like increases in cost or things like that, but we don't know. And so we're gonna have to keep an eye out and try to update when we learn more about the potential negative effects, because that will obviously impact the power level of this certain ability. But here on the screen, these are two very powerful effects. The -2 power essentially shuts down River Shaper, and giving a unit the ability, or rather inability, to block. The ability can't block, inability to block, however you want to word that. Granting that is pretty big as well, especially if you're playing an aggressive deck. And so I think that Prank has a lot of potential applications, but whether or not it's powerful and whether or not it ends up being competitive doesn't matter. People are going to hate it. If you remember when Nab was revealed, I know that was a long time ago, I said very explicitly, hey, in the Elder Scrolls Legends, there were a couple of cards, like 2 cards, that had a similar effect to Nab, and people hated them. Like, they were loathed, absolutely maligned, and that was just silver bullet instances of that effect. And then Nab was like a full-on game mechanic, and I said, hey, people are going to hate this. They're going to be very vocal about it, and it doesn't matter if it's good or not, people will hate it. And then they did, and Nab ended up getting nerfed in a couple of instances, and it got reworked to pull from the bottom as opposed to the top and all sorts of stuff. And so I'm just going to tell you up front right now, whether or not this ends up being competitive, I think is irrelevant. You're going to have people who hate this mechanic. This card is already a very maligned mechanic in card games, and I understand why. Nobody likes to have nothing to do. It's a very unfun feeling. It's the same reason why Magic the Gathering moved away from like land destruction, for example. Nobody likes that feeling of helplessness. you play a game so that both players can be engaged, and when you essentially make it so that one player can do nothing, it's very unfun. And so while this isn't truly discard, the ability to just shut down cards before you ever have the chance to play them is going to feel bad, and there will absolutely be people who are not happy about this mechanic, and they will be vocal and they will tell you over and over again how much they hate it. And so just be prepared for that. So this is your warning. This will be a very maligned mechanic, whether it is good or not. And so we are going to go back now because obviously, as I said before, Prank is a token card. It is not something that you can just put in your deck. It has to be created. And so we're going to start with Bananami. And so I don't know if this is supposed to be a benevolent anemone or if this is just an anemone named Ben. Either way, I love his big, adorable face. This is a 4-cost 4/3 from Bandle City. When I'm summoned, create 2 pranks in hand. This is the chump wump of pranks. So instead of getting mushrooms, you get pranks, but similar body. And considering that chump wump is a card that still sees some play, it used to be a staple in a ton of decks, but it even still sees some play now, and that's just with the mushrooms. I have to assume that this card will see play, even if it's not for the actual prank. Anytime that you can generate additional resources in your hand that you can use for discarding or other effects, it's usually a very powerful card. We already also know that Bandle City has some mechanics where if you have created 2 or more cards throughout the course of a game, it triggers things, or if you've added 2 or more cards to your hand in a turn, it triggers things. And this obviously is an in-region trigger. I'd mentioned Chump Wump in the past, but this takes care of it right out at Bandle City. And so this card will find a home somewhere. I'm absolutely sure of it. And so that means you will likely see Prank again, whether it's powerful or not. So just be prepared. Now, the other reveal on this screen, thankfully, does not have to deal with Prank. This is Conchologist. This is a 2-cost 2/2 Yordle in Bandle City only. And on play, you manifest a spell from your regions that costs 3 or less. So this is like an invoke specifically for your regions, and I think it's all right. I think it's mostly going to depend on the kinds of spells you're hoping to hit. It's not a dual region Yordle, so this one for me is really going to come down to what the payoff is for the Yordle tag. But I mean, it's a body that lets you create more cards in slower decks. This could be a very valuable early game blocker. We're going to move on to the next graphic because while there was no champions, there's still plenty of cards to talk about, a lot to cover. And so we're going to move on to Kelp Maidens. This is a 2-cost 2/1 with the elusive keyword from Bandle City, and it says Nexus Strike, create a prank in hand. Now, when Bandle Commando was revealed, I wasn't very high on it because we didn't know whether Owlcat was going to be very relevant. I think Prank is relevant enough, especially if you're trying to play this in a Fizz deck or any other deck that cares about spells, because Prank is a very cheap and easy spell. So it could be Fizz decks, could be like Lee Sin decks, it could be Zoe decks. There's a number of ways that I think you could go with trying to use Prank effectively, because you want early annoyances, early aggression, and then you also want to kind of mess with your opponent's hand, mess with their answers, and you want to do so at a low cost. I think Prank has the potential, depending on how wide the pool is of negative effects and what the range of negative effects are. I think that Prank has the potential to be very powerful in terms of tempo, slowing down your opponent's responses so that your little units can get across the finish line. Now, here, a 2-cost 2/1 with elusive is very relevant on its own. The Nexus Strike is great, and the Prank effect is obviously, I think, going to be very, very annoying at a minimum for your opponents, even if it's not very effective. So I think Kelp Maidens will absolutely find a home. I think this will see play, and I think that this is going to be a card that people end up absolutely despising. Now we're going to move on to the cutest of today's reveals by a long shot. This is Otter Puss. This is a 1-cost 1/1 from Bandle City. It has the attune keyword, which is very good because when I'm summoned, create a prank in hand. And so that means that attune could be used for a prank right out of the gate. You can turn 1, play a 1/1, and play your prank right then and there if you want to, because of the attune keyword. And I think that, again, if prank ends up being enough of a tempo boost, with those negative effects, this could also find a home. Even with the subpar body of being a 1/1, I think the attune helps. And I think that because it's a summon effect and not a play effect, there are some other ways that you could potentially abuse it as well. But being able to go like turn 1 Otter Puss, turn 2 Maidens, swing on turn 3 if you were on odds or whatever, play some more pranks, like it's going to get very annoying very quickly. And I think Otter Puss is adorable, but also going to be hated. In fact, when it comes to Otter Puss, I can't think of a time where we've had cuteness levels this high, but likely hate levels this high. And so as far as the history of Legends of Runeterra goes, I can't think of another time where something this cute will likely end up being this hated. But we're going to move on to Shark Trainer. This is a card that thankfully does not interact or deal with prank, but I think this is a really interesting card as well. So Shark Trainer is a 7 cost 6/6, has the Yordle tag. It's from Bandle City and Bilgewater. It also has the attune keyword, which is very relevant because it reads, when allies attack, spend 1 spell mana to summon an attacking Short Tooth. Now, Short Tooth, I know my face is covering it. This is a 4/2 overwhelm. Now, I want to highlight a couple of things here. First and foremost, Shark Trainer has attune, so the turn you play it, it will be granting you some spell mana so you can get at least 1 trigger when your allies attack. I also want to highlight that it says very specifically when allies attack, not when Shark Trainer attacks. This could be a very expensive backline unit. This could be like the mid-range version of Azir. Now, it's obviously not the same because it comes down much later and you have to have spell mana, but there are some benefits over Azir where Shark Trainer starts to shine. So one, you know, a 7 cost 6/6, that's okay stats for a 7 cost, but it's big enough that it's likely going to survive removal, and that's the important piece. And the other thing that I want to highlight here is that Short Tooth is not ephemeral. So if they don't block it, it's going to stick around and it's going to continue to give you value, whether that's through then blocking on the next turn, attacking the next time you get the attack token, etc., etc. The fact that Short Tooth has Overwhelm is very relevant as well, because if you're trying to push damage home, it can help you by potentially going over the top. So this is a very nice, aggressive mid-range card. I think that 7 mana might be a touch too expensive, but if this thing was any cheaper, I would also say that it was quite busted, to be honest. And so I really like this card, and I want to see if it can find a home, because the value is there. And you're in Bilgewater, which is a region that already has access to scouts, for example, and it is when they attack. So as long as you have more than 1 spell mana, you could get more than 1 Short Tooth. All of the Azir tricks still apply here. And so I'm excited to at least play around with this card. I think that, again, it's got potential. I like the long-term benefits of it, but it's also coming down on round 7. And so how long-term do you really want it to be? Do you want a game to go past, you know, round 9 if you're trying to close things out with a Shark Trainer? I don't know, in which case you're looking at 2. If you've got scouts, maybe 3, maybe 4 attacks out of this. And so it's a very powerful effect, but I think that the timing is what could potentially hold it back. And I really wish that it was just a hair cheaper, but I also understand why it is not. And so that's it for Shark Trainer. We do have one last graphic of reveals to go over, and I already know that prank is going to upset people and it's a bit spicy, but we also now have Trixie Tentacles. This is a 2-cost fast spell from Bandle City, and it says your opponent discards their lowest cost card. Now, people don't like discard, and we've already had some other discard spells in the game, but they were slow speed and they were, I think, highest cost. This is early in the game, but it's getting rid of their lowest cost card, which means it's potentially disrupting whatever their next play was. This is far more relevant in terms of timing. This is also fast speed as well, so you can do this in response to things to maybe mess up future plays. And it's worth noting that this is just lowest cost card, so this can hit champions, this can hit spells, this can hit whatever it feels like hitting, as long as it's a low cost card. And so this one, I think, will again, just like prank, whether it is competitive or not, this one will get hate. People will not like playing against this card any more than they like playing against Prank. You will hear about this card. I know that I'm certainly going to experiment with it because, like I said, the timing is so much better on this because it's very specifically a cheap discard spell that is getting rid of other cheap cards, which could potentially mess with your opponent's timing. And so that's a pretty big deal. And the number of cheap cards that people hold on to when they even have like higher cost units that this could hit are also very high and very relevant. Against Demacia, for example, you could be spending this to eat a sharp sight, eat a single combat. That's a very big deal in some instances. And so I do think that this is going to warrant testing, and I think that people will hate it. We're going to move on though, and we're going to talk about Shell Game. This is a 5-cost burst spell from Bandle City, and it says refill your spell mana, give an ally elusive and +1/+1 this round. So the plus side is this is a net cost of 2 mana for elusive and +1/+1 because it's going to cost 5, but you refill your spell mana, and assuming you empty that out to play this, which you would, then really you're only paying 2. But the negative is that you have to have 5 up front. And so for aggressive decks that might want to run this, that's usually bad because a lot of times you kind of want to empty your hand out and then have mana left back for a cheap combat trick or 2. This requires you to bank a bunch of it and then you get the refill. So in that regard, I think there's a bit of a drawback. Now, if we get more effects like Shark Trainer that care specifically about our spell mana, and we start seeing a premium on units like Attune and so on and so forth, something like this that refills your spell mana could be a pretty big deal. We'll have to wait and see if that ends up being the case. Another couple of places where this could find a home would be if we see a rise in the playability of Heimerdinger. Remember, for a long time, Flash of Brilliance was a mainstay just because you could play it and then it refills your spell mana, and so you can make a bunch of turrets. While this isn't necessarily the same because you still do spend some mana, this is a 5-cost spell that effectively costs 2, and so you could make yourself a pretty large turret there for Heimerdinger while also giving yourself that spell mana back. And that's also potentially relevant if Heimerdinger gets more support, being that he is a Yordle, being that he's getting that dual region treatment. So we could see that. Another place where this theoretically could find a home would be in something like a Sivir deck. It does, after all, grant elusive. But I think ultimately, if your choices are Ghost, which is just always 1, or this, you're likely not going to choose this unless you really want to be in the Bandle City region. And then even going a step further, I think we all kind of assume that Sivir is going to be unbuffed, and that might impact things as well. We're going to end the reveals for today by going full circle and going all the way back to an effect that has to do with Prank. And so we have Trinket Trade. This is a 1-cost burst spell from Bandle City, and it says manifest an Otter Puss or one of 2 spells from your regions that cost 3 or less. So remember, manifest always presents you with 3 options. The way this card reads, you're always going to be shown an Otter Puss, and then you're also going to be shown 2 spells from your regions that cost 3 or less. Now, I love the versatility here. There are certainly some spells that you might want to dig for within your regions, probably ones you're already running in your deck, and that's great. Again, assuming that you're playing this with like some sort of Fizz tempo deck, this is another cheap spell to help you with those spell activations, so on and so forth. But also, it provides you potentially with another Otter Puss, which then in turn provides you potentially with another Prank. And so my beloved Otter Puss will likely continue to really make people upset. More people will hate my poor Otter Puss, and more people will complain about Prank in all likelihood. And so I do like this card. I think this actually might be my favorite of the kind of Prank oriented options just because of the versatility. But as I said before, I suspect these cards will see some play, at least early on, for testing purposes. And it does not matter in my mind whether they end up being competitive or not. People are just going to hate them. And so that's where we are going to end. And as I said, no champions, but it doesn't mean it wasn't spicy. Hand disruption is the sort of mechanic that really splits a player base right down the middle. You get a lot of people who really enjoy it, a lot of people who think it's necessary to stop greedy decks and combo decks, but then you also get the other side of the spectrum where people say, hey, it's very unfun. I'm just here trying to do my wacky combo, and it might not even be a broken combo, but I can't even play those decks because hand disruption exists. And I fully understand and I empathize with both sides of the spectrum. That's the nature of card games, unfortunately. It's really hard to make everybody happy, and we all have our own play styles, and we have our ways of enjoying the game. Player expression is big in card games, and so I get it. I just know that this is going to result in some people being very upset, and so I would say in the comments, let me know which side of the fence you fall on. Are you pro hand disruption? Are you against it? Does this worry you? I'm personally in the realm of needing to see more of what the possible outcomes of prank are before I truly make a judgment. I think that the two that we were shown were pretty powerful, and I think the others will probably be similar in power. I can't imagine that they're going to give us too wide of a range, because then that makes it even harder to balance, but I still feel like I need to see the full kind of suite of options. I do like that it gives us information about what's in our opponent's hands, and I do like that it gives us the ability to make tempo plays that are not board based, which is a really interesting just form of design. It's a game mechanic that explores a new area of design space that I'm intrigued by at a minimum, right? From a game design standpoint, I understand what it's trying to do, and I really like that part, but I do also understand that it's going to piss some people off. So anyway, let me know. Are you pro hand disruption? Are you against it? Are you indifferent? Do you just want to play your yorldes? Let me know. But if you made it this far, I appreciate you. As always, thank you for watching. If you're new, consider subscribing. And until next time, may you walk on warm sands.